Native people have been using the latest technology for 10,000 years, and we're still in that frame of taking advantage of technology and turning it into stories. Tribes in the plains use buffalo robes to write stories. In the Northeast, they use shells. In the Northwest and other places, it was petroglyphs written on stone. I mean, the idea of how we tell stories is universal.
Everywhere that you look in every part of this country, there are Indigenous people who have inhabited the land, who have taken care of the water since time immemorial. We're only better as citizens if we learn about the first peoples of this land, the ones who have cultivated the exact buildings and, roads and trains and planes that we fly on. It is a real duty of everyone to learn about the Indigenous people of the places that they live.
More than 40 years ago, Tim Gallego, who's a Lakota journalist, had this vision for Lakota Times. And he wanted a newspaper that would serve Pine Ridge, South Dakota, the Ogallala community, and was hyper-focused on that. Then he decided he wanted to expand and serve all of Indian country, and that became Indian Country Today. It was a time when there were a lot of national aspirations, and Tim was a big thinking kind of guy. I think his vision was for a national newspaper that reflected all of Indian country, which even then was complicated. 500 nations in the US, another 300 in Canada. Trying to come up with one story is daunting. When it was in its heyday, they actually had the old school distribution system with stores selling it for $1 a copy, and you'd go buy your groceries, and there on the end would be Indian Country Today. And that was their primary delivery, that and subscriptions. It became a must-read paper in Washington, D.C., both at the federal agencies and Congress, where people wanted to know what was going on in Indian country.
I remember growing up reading ICT as an actual physical newspaper. And ICT has grown from a magazine, from the newspaper, newsletter, to what it is today with a digital news component and a broadcast component. And it's continuously growing and transforming.
So when I first started at ICT, I was one of the first 5 or 6 employees. And I recall Mark Trahant and Jordan Bennett McGay and I, sitting back to back, just pop, 3 little computers in a basement to go from 5 employees to 40, 50 plus. To see our continued growth is just makes me really hopeful for what we're building.
We're still in an era when there's not a single Native American on broadcast news, not at PBS, not at NBC, not at ABC. And that vacuum, I think, is important for us to fill.
I know that when I was growing up at my family's home in Gila Pueblo in New Mexico, I never saw anyone who looked like me on television or as a digital reporter. And now we have an entire staff full of Indigenous journalists, and we're really interested in cultivating that next generation.
I'm the mother of 2 beautiful girls. They won't get to live on the reservation like I did. They won't get to embrace or experience the culture, the language, the food, or the sheep crying in the morning, or the roosters. Growing up with Indian Country Today playing in the background every single day, they will get a grasp of what the culture is like, what the language is like.
If you watch the ICT newscast, you likely hear me start the show every day with Amadawa Hopa or Ku'atsi Hopa. And so many people ask me what that means. It means, hello everyone, are you doing well? Or how do I greet you today, everyone? And I think that's one of the most beautiful parts of our newscast, is that one of the first words that you hear is the Keres language, and that is the language of my people. And I hope that in the future, everyone can introduce themselves in their Indigenous languages.
There was a story that the Associated Press wrote that had a great headline. Indian Country Today has a new owner itself, and IndiJ Public Media is that owner. And really, it's not a separate entity in the sense that it's the same people. And we had a visioning exercise and basically started shopping for a name. And IndiJ Public Media seemed to capture a lot of what we were trying to do. In 2018, when I took over, I did not want to change the name. I thought Indian Country Today was an amazing legacy and wanted to build on that. Then George Floyd happened, and people started to rethink all the institutions. And a name of such colonial implications was one that could not survive. We had a committee. We started to think through what possibilities are. One of the things that we found was, what if we didn't define it and just made it ICT? Younger readers could see it as Indigenous and redefine it their way, and older readers could still think of it as Indian country today. ICT allowed us to do both without being prescriptive.
I think it's important to have Indigenous voices telling Indigenous stories, and working with a majority Indigenous staff. You don't have to explain why a story is important. You don't have to fight to have your voice heard. We all come from different tribal communities across the country, and there's a respect and understanding that most newsrooms might not have.
Without an organization like ICT that can uncover and represent tribal communities and Indigenous perspectives through our mediums and our platform and to our audience, critical content is not getting out there, and a tribal perspective is not being well represented.
ICT has shaped the way I see journalism, that showed me that diversity and inclusion is possible within the journalism industry. I think up until recently, newsrooms were predominantly white male. A lot of things that aren't traditionally newsworthy are newsworthy to people, being from different walks of life.
One of the most memorable experiences that I've had at ICT was interviewing Vice President Kamala Harris in a one-on-one exclusive interview at the Gila River Indian community. That was so impactful because Vice President Kamala Harris is second in command in our entire nation, and it is extremely rare for federal officials, especially high-level federal officials, to talk about Indian country and our issues. It was so meaningful to be able to have that moment, but I think perhaps what was even more meaningful was to see the reaction from Native people to that interview.
The reason why it's important for ICT to be on as many platforms as possible is because not everybody thinks like a news person, and that's fine. Some people are on social media and that's how they get their news. Some people sign up for newsletters and get an email box each day, and that's how they get their news.
A division of IndiJ Public Media is a nonprofit organization. We exist by way of philanthropic relationships, individual donors writing a check, private foundations making a grant, special events and sponsorships garnering funds that ultimately fund our operations at 100%. So engagement from the community philanthropically is critical.
It's important that they talk about ICT and that word of mouth spreads, that we are very vital and we take our role seriously in representing correctly and accurately and genuinely Native history and culture, languages, education, etc.
One of the things that I just love is it doesn't take more than 10 minutes if you drop into a tribal community to see how much talent there is, and to be an avenue for that talent to grow is fabulous. ICT has always had a double mission. One mission is to serve the audience and just have information about tribal communities in a way that's important and useful. The second one that's equally as important is to build a platform for young people, for journalists. I mean, I want people to look at ICT on a tablet or on a website and say, that's where I want my kid to work when they grow up.